Javier knelt in the dirt, his hands steady as he pruned a rosebush, the sharp snip of his shears cutting through the morning quiet. The sprawling estate around him buzzed with the distant hum of wealth, Cassandra Steele's wealth. She owned every inch of this land, from the marble fountains to the manicured lawns, and she never let Javier forget it. Her voice, sharp and cold, had a way of slicing through his focus. Today was no different. "Javier, these roses are all wrong," she called from the terrace, her heels clicking as she approached.
"Red? Again? No imagination."
Her words stung, but he kept his eyes on the bush, his jaw tight. Cassandra Steele, tech mogul, billionaire, and self-proclaimed tastemaker, had a reputation for perfection. She'd built an empire on code and ambition, and now she turned that same ruthless scrutiny on Javier's work. He'd been the estate's gardener for 5 years, pouring his soul into every flowerbed, every hedge. His designs weren't just plants, they were art, alive and breathing. But to Cassandra, they were props, something to impress her elite guests. She mocked his uninspired layouts, criticized his sloppy edges, and once, in front of her staff, called his work ethic lazy. Lazy. The word burned. Javier, who rose before dawn to tend her grounds, who knew every plant by name, lazy? He didn't argue. Not then. Not ever. Words weren't his weapon. His hands, his vision, his patience, those were. But each jab from Cassandra chipped away at his pride. She'd point out uneven grass blades, demand he replant entire beds on a whim, then sigh as if he'd failed her. "I hired you for excellence," she'd say, "not this." Her guests, sipping champagne at her galas, never noticed the care in his work. They saw only her grandeur. Javier was invisible, a shadow in dirt-stained gloves. That morning, as she loomed over him, her perfume sharp against the earthy air, she gestured at the rosebush. "This is amateur. Fix it before the gala next month. I'm hosting senators, CEOs, people who matter. Don't embarrass me." Javier nodded, his face blank, but inside, something snapped. He wasn't just a gardener. He was a craftsman, a keeper of life. And he was done being her punching bag. He stood, brushing soil from his knees, and met her gaze for the first time that day. "I'll make it right," he said, his voice steady. Cassandra raised an eyebrow, unimpressed, and walked away, her heels clicking like a countdown. Javier watched her go, his mind already turning. He'd show her. Not with words, not with anger, but with something she couldn't ignore. Something that would make her see him. Back in his small shed at the edge of the estate, Javier pulled out a notebook, its pages worn from years of sketches. For months, he'd been planning a secret project, a labyrinth garden, a living maze of rare plants he'd cultivated in a hidden greenhouse. He'd smuggled seeds from markets, traded with botanists, and nursed delicate blooms to life. The labyrinth was his masterpiece, a defiance of Cassandra's scorn. It would be intricate, alive, unforgettable. And it would be ready for her gala. He worked in stolen hours, after Cassandra retired to her mansion, under the cover of dusk. The labyrinth took shape in a secluded corner of the estate, where old oaks hid his progress. He carved paths, planted vines, and whispered to his flowers as if they could hear his resolve. Each night, he fell into bed exhausted, dirt under his nails, but alive with purpose. Cassandra's mockery fueled him. Her gala would be her stage, but the labyrinth would be his. Weeks passed, and her nitpicking grew worse. "Javier, the hedges are uneven," she snapped one afternoon, pointing at a row he'd trimmed that morning. "Do you even try?" He swallowed his reply, nodding as always. But her words no longer cut as deep. He had a plan, a secret growing in the shadows. She could mock him now. Let her. Soon, she'd have no choice but to see what he could do. The gala loomed, a glittering spectacle Cassandra had planned for months. Invitations went out to the powerful and the rich, names Javier only knew from headlines. She wanted to dazzle them, to cement her status as untouchable. She'd hired chefs, musicians, decorators, but Javier? She barely mentioned him. "Just keep the grounds tidy," she'd said, dismissing him with a wave. He smiled to himself. Tidy. She had no idea.
As the days ticked down, Javier's labyrinth neared completion. The paths twisted, lined with glowing white jasmine and rare orchids that caught the light like jewels. He'd woven in surprises, hidden alcoves, bursts of color, scents that shifted with each turn. It was a world within her world, one she couldn't claim. He imagined her guests wandering its paths, their gasps of awe drowning out her complaints. He imagined her face when she realized what he'd done. One evening, as he watered a fragile sapphire bloom, a groundskeeper caught him. "What's all this, Javier?" the man asked, eyeing the maze. Javier froze, then smiled. "Just a side project. Keep it quiet, yeah?" The groundskeeper nodded, but Javier's heart raced. He couldn't risk Cassandra finding out. Not yet. The labyrinth was his rebellion, his proof. If she saw it too soon, she'd find a way to twist it, to make it hers. He worked faster, his hands steady but his mind on edge. Cassandra's gala was in 10 days. 10 days to finish his masterpiece. 10 days to show her who he was. He didn't know if the labyrinth would change her, or if she'd ever admit she was wrong. But he knew one thing: when her guests stepped into his creation, they wouldn't see her. They'd see him. Javier's days blurred into a rhythm of secrecy and sweat. By dawn, he tended Cassandra's estate, clipping hedges and planting her demanded tulips, his face a mask of obedience. By night, he slipped into the labyrinth, his true work. The maze grew wilder, more alive, its paths twisting under moonlight. Rare lilies unfurled, their petals glowing like lanterns. Vines curled into arches, heavy with blossoms that smelled of honey and spice. Each plant was a piece of him, a quiet defiance of Cassandra's scorn. But time was tight, and the gala was a week away. Cassandra's demands sharpened as the event neared. She stalked the grounds daily, her eyes hunting flaws. "Javier, these paths are uneven," she snapped, pointing at a walkway he'd leveled twice. "And the fountain beds? Dull. Do better." Her voice carried that same dismissive edge, as if he were a tool, not a man. Javier nodded, his silence a shield. He'd learned long ago that arguing with her was like arguing with a storm, pointless and draining. Instead, he channeled his anger into the labyrinth, where every bloom was a rebuttal. Her mockery wasn't new, but it stung deeper now, with his secret so close to fruition. Once, as he weeded a rosebed, she stood over him, arms crossed. "You're slow today," she said, loud enough for a passing maid to hear. "If you can't keep up, I'll find someone who can." The maid glanced at Javier, pity in her eyes, but he kept his head down, his hands moving. Slow? He'd been up since 4, hauling soil for her perfect lawn. The threat lingered, though. Cassandra replaced staff on whims. He couldn't afford to slip. The labyrinth was his sanctuary, but it wasn't safe. The groundskeeper who'd seen it hadn't talked, but others roamed the estate. One wrong glance, one whispered rumor, and Cassandra would know. She'd tear it apart, call it a waste of her resources. Javier took precautions, working only when the estate slept, covering his tracks with tarps and shadows. He barely slept, his body aching, but the maze drove him. It was more than plants now, it was his pride, his proof. 3 days before the gala, disaster struck. Javier arrived at the labyrinth at dusk, his tools in hand, and found a section trampled. A row of delicate moonflowers lay crushed, their stems snapped. His stomach dropped. No animal could have done this. Boots had left deep prints in the soil. Someone had been here. He scanned the shadows, heart pounding, but the estate was still. He knelt, salvaging what he could, his hands trembling. The damage wasn't fatal, but it was a warning. He wasn't as hidden as he thought. He worked through the night, replanting, reshaping, his mind racing. Who'd been here? A curious worker? A spy for Cassandra? She'd been watching him closely lately, her critiques more pointed. That morning, she'd stopped him mid-task, her eyes narrow. "What's got you so distracted, Javier? You're not slacking, are you?" He'd mumbled an excuse, but her gaze lingered, sharp as a blade. Did she suspect something? He couldn't know, but he couldn't stop. The gala was too close.
The next day, Cassandra called him to the mansion, a rare summons. He stood in her sleek office, dirt smudged on his boots, while she leaned against her desk, immaculate in a tailored suit. "The gala's my biggest yet," she said, her tone clipped.
"I need the grounds flawless. No mistakes, Javier. None."
Her eyes bored into him, searching.
"You've been off. Anything I should know?"
He shook his head, his pulse loud in his ears. "Just focused on the work," he said. She stared a moment longer, then waved him out.
"Don't disappoint me."
He left, his chest tight. She didn't trust him.
Maybe she never had.
But her doubt only hardened his resolve. The labyrinth was nearly done, its paths a tapestry of color and scent. He'd added final touches, hidden nooks with stone benches, a central clearing where star-shaped blooms framed a small fountain. It was breathtaking, even unfinished. He could see it now, her guests wondering, wide-eyed, their praise a quiet victory.
Cassandra would have to face it, have to see him.
2 nights before the gala, he overheard a conversation that chilled him. 2 of Cassandra's staff, smoking near the stables, didn't notice him in the shadows.
"She's got her eye on Javier," one said. "Thinks he's up to something. Told me to watch him." The other laughed. "What, the gardener? He's harmless."
The first shrugged.
"She doesn't think so. Says he's too quiet." Javier slipped away, his mind spinning. She was closing in.
He had to finish fast. He threw himself into the labyrinth, working until his hands bled. The trampled section was restored, the paths perfected. He barely ate, barely slept, driven by a fire he hadn't felt in years. Cassandra's gala was her battlefield, but the labyrinth was his. He'd make it undeniable, a creation so stunning even she couldn't dismiss it. The risk was worth it. If she fired him, if she raged, he'd leave with his head high, knowing he'd won.
The day before the gala, Javier walked the maze one last time, checking every detail.
The jasmine glowed, the orchids shimmered, the air hummed with life. It was ready. He stood in the central clearing, his chest swelling with quiet pride. Tomorrow, her guests would arrive. Tomorrow, the world would see what he could do. He didn't know how Cassandra would react, or if she'd try to claim his work as hers. But he knew one thing: when the labyrinth opened, it would speak for him. As he left the maze, locking the gate behind him, he heard footsteps. He turned, tense, but it was only the groundskeeper, the one who'd seen the labyrinth before. "It's something else, Javier," the man said, his voice low. "She won't know what hit her." Javier nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "Hope so," he said. The groundskeeper clapped his shoulder and walked off, leaving Javier alone with his secret, one night from triumph. The gala morning dawned bright, the estate buzzing with last-minute chaos. Caterers hauled crates, decorators strung lights, and musicians tuned their strings. Javier moved through it all, invisible as always, tending the visible gardens while his labyrinth waited, hidden behind the oaks. Cassandra's orders had been clear: keep the grounds pristine, stay out of sight. She hadn't mentioned the labyrinth. She didn't know it existed. That thought steadied Javier as he trimmed a final hedge, his hands steady despite the sleepless nights. Cassandra was everywhere, a whirlwind in a sleek black dress, barking orders. "Javier, the lilies by the entrance, too sparse." "Fix it," she snapped, barely looking at him. He nodded, biting back the urge to tell her about the maze. Not yet. Tonight, when her guests arrived, he'd unveil it. He'd spent the early hours rigging subtle lanterns along the labyrinth paths, their glow soft but striking. The maze was ready, jasmine heavy with scent, orchids catching the light, paths twisting like a living puzzle. It was his gamble, his stand. By dusk, the estate gleamed. Guests arrived in sleek cars, their laughter spilling across the lawns. Senators, CEOs, artists, Cassandra's elite circle, all here to bask in her glory. Javier watched from the shadows, his work gloves stuffed in his pocket. The main gardens earned murmurs of approval, but he knew they were just the opening act. He'd planned his move carefully. A groundskeeper, the one who'd kept his secret, would spread word of a hidden garden during the cocktail hour. Curiosity would do the rest. As the gala kicked off, Cassandra held court on the terrace, her smile sharp, her voice carrying. "Welcome to my little paradise," she said, gesturing at the estate. Her guests clapped, charmed. Javier, blending into the background, felt a flicker of nerves. What if they didn't care? What if the labyrinth fell flat? He pushed the doubt down. He'd poured everything into this, years of knowledge, months of secret work. It would speak for itself. The groundskeeper played his part. Javier overheard him near the bar, casual but loud enough. "There's a secret garden out back, something special. You should check it out." A few guests perked up, intrigued. Word spread fast. By the time the first course was served, a small group slipped away, drawn to the oaks. Javier followed at a distance, his heart pounding. This was it. The labyrinth's entrance, framed by curling vines, stopped them cold. "What is this?" a woman in a silk gown gasped. They stepped inside, their voices fading into odd whispers. Javier lingered outside, listening. "Incredible," a man said. "Who designed this?" another asked. No one knew. Not yet. More guests trickled in, drawn by the buzz. The maze worked its magic, its paths surprised them, its scents enveloped them, its hidden alcoves sparked delight. A senator, grizzled and hard to impress, laughed like a kid in one of the nooks. Cassandra noticed the thinning crowd. Javier saw her frown, scanning the terrace. "Where's everyone going?" she muttered to an aide. The aide shrugged, but the groundskeeper, nearby, piped up. "They're in some garden, ma'am. Behind the oaks." Cassandra's eyes narrowed. "What garden?" she snapped. Javier, trimming a nearby bush, kept his head down, his pulse racing. She stormed off, her heels clicking toward the labyrinth. He didn't follow. He didn't need to. Inside the maze, the guests were lost in wonder. A tech CEO ran his hand over a rare orchid, shaking his head. "This is genius," he said. A designer, sketching a path on her napkin, called it a masterpiece. The praise grew louder, the crowd thicker. Cassandra reached the entrance, her face a mix of confusion and irritation. She stepped inside, and the maze swallowed her, too. Javier heard the shift, her sharp voice quieted, replaced by the same odd murmurs as the others. He smiled to himself, small but fierce. The labyrinth was a triumph. Guests wandered for hours, some circling back to explore again. They talked of nothing else, their champagne forgotten. "Who made this?" a journalist asked, her phone out, snapping photos. The groundskeeper, loyal to Javier's plan, said only, "The gardener." Whispers spread, "The gardener, the gardener." Javier's name started to surface, passed from guest to guest. He stayed in the main gardens, working, but he felt the shift. He wasn't invisible anymore. Cassandra emerged after an hour, her face unreadable. She didn't seek Javier, didn't call for him. Instead, she rejoined her guests, her smile tight. But the damage was done. The gala wasn't about her anymore, it was about the labyrinth, about the gardener. Guests sought Javier out, some shaking his hand, others asking questions. "How'd you do it?" a young artist asked, eyes wide. Javier shrugged, modest. "Just love the plants," he said. They ate it up. As the night wound down, the labyrinth stayed the star. Guests left talking about it, promising to return, to bring friends. Javier overheard a senator tell Cassandra, "You've got a treasure in that gardener. Don't let him go." She nodded, her jaw tight, but said nothing. Javier caught her glancing at him once, her eyes sharp but different, less certain. He turned back to his work, his chest light. The maze had spoken. He'd won this round. But he wasn't done. The labyrinth was his opening move, not his endgame. Cassandra's silence didn't mean surrender. She'd try to spin this, to claim the maze as her idea, or worse, to bury it. He knew her too well. As he swept a path clean, his mind turned. He'd show her the labyrinth's heart tomorrow, alone, and make her face his vision.
not to gloat, but to make her see. He wasn't just a gardener. He was Javier.
The morning after the gala, the estate felt quieter, the air heavy with the aftermath of triumph. Javier worked early, clearing stray glasses and petals from the main gardens, his body tired but his mind sharp. The labyrinth had done its job, guests had left in awe, their praise still echoing in his ears.
But Cassandra's silence gnawed at him.
She hadn't spoken to him last night, hadn't acknowledged the maze. He knew her too well to think she'd let this go. She'd be plotting, maybe to claim his work, maybe to tear it down.
He wasn't done yet.
Cassandra appeared mid-morning, striding across the lawn, her face a mask of control. "Javier," she called, her voice clipped.
"Walk with me."
No please, no softness, just a command.
He set down his rake, wiping his hands, and followed.
She led him toward the labyrinth, her heels sinking slightly in the grass.
His stomach tightened. This was it.
She'd seen the maze, felt its impact.
Now she'd show her hand.
They reached the entrance, the vines curling like a quiet challenge. Cassandra stopped, her eyes scanning the paths.
"This," she said, gesturing at the labyrinth, "wasn't authorized."
Her tone was ice, but Javier caught a flicker in her gaze, something less certain. He stayed quiet, letting her words hang. She stepped inside, and he followed, the jasmine scent wrapping around them. "You went behind my back," she said, her voice sharper now. "Used my resources, my land, for this stunt." Javier's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady.
"It's not a stunt. It's my work."
She turned, her eyes narrowing.
"Your work?
You're paid to follow orders, not play artist." The words stung, but he held her gaze.
"I followed your orders.
The grounds were perfect. This," he nodded at the maze, "was extra. For your guests." She scoffed, but her eyes darted to a cluster of glowing orchids, their petals catching the light.
She didn't reply.
They walked deeper, the paths twisting, the air alive with scent. Javier watched her, reading her silence. She was rattled, her usual sharpness dulled by the maze's beauty. At a hidden alcove, where star-shaped blooms framed a stone bench, she stopped. "How?" she asked, almost to herself. "How did you do this?" Her voice wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. It was a crack in her armor.
He seized it.
"Years," he said simply.
"I studied plants, learned their secrets.
Traded for seeds, grew them in a greenhouse I built myself. This," he gestured at the labyrinth, "is what I know."
He paused, then added, "You called my work uninspired. Lazy. This is my answer."
His voice was calm, but the words carried weight.
Cassandra's lips parted, but no retort came.
She looked away, her fingers brushing a vine.
For a moment, they stood in silence, the maze humming around them.
Then she spoke, quieter.
"The guests loved it. They're still talking about it." Javier nodded, unsurprised. "They saw it for what it is," he said.
"Not yours, not mine, just the work." Her eyes flicked to him, sharp again, but she didn't argue. Instead, she walked on, her steps slower, her usual strut gone.
Javier followed, sensing the shift.
She was listening, maybe for the first time. At the maze's heart, where the small fountain bubbled under star-shaped blooms, Cassandra stopped again.
"Why hide it?" she asked, her voice low. "Why not tell me?"
Javier considered lying, softening the truth, but he was done with that. "You wouldn't have listened," he said. "You'd have called it a waste, torn it up. I needed you to see it finished." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. She knew he was right. She sat on a bench, unexpected, her hands clasped. "I underestimated you," she said, the words stiff, like they hurt to say.
Javier didn't gloat.
He sat across from her, the fountain's murmur filling the space.
"I'm not here to embarrass you," he said. "I just want my work to matter."
She looked at him, really looked, and something in her softened. "It does," she said, almost a whisper.
"It did last night." The admission hung between them, fragile but real.
Javier felt the weight of years, her jabs, her dismissals, lift slightly.
But he wasn't naive. Cassandra didn't change overnight. What now? He asked, direct.
She exhaled, her eyes on the fountain.
I don't know, she admitted. But I want to understand this. Your vision.
It wasn't an apology, but it was close.
He nodded, accepting it for what it was. They walked back, the maze's paths guiding them out.
Cassandra didn't speak, but her silence felt different, not angry, not calculating. At the entrance, she paused.
Meet me here tomorrow, she said. Show me more.
It wasn't a request, but it wasn't a demand either.
Javier nodded. I will.
She walked away, her heels clicking, but slower, less certain.
Alone, Javier returned to the maze's heart, checking the fountain, adjusting a bloom.
The gala had been his triumph, but this, her listening, her seeing, was something more. He didn't trust her yet, didn't know if she'd twist this into her own story. But for the first time, he felt her respect, hard-won and tentative.
It was enough for now. That afternoon, a guest from the gala, a botanist, called the estate, asking for Javier. Your labyrinth, she said, it's extraordinary. I want to feature it in a journal.
Javier, stunned, agreed. Word was spreading, his name tied to the maze. Cassandra would hear of it, and she'd have to decide, embrace his work or fight it. He was ready for either. As dusk fell, he walked the labyrinth one last time, its paths glowing under the lanterns. He'd built it to prove a point, but it was more than that now. It was his voice, his legacy. Tomorrow, he'd show Cassandra its secrets, not to win her over, but to show her who he was. She'd mocked him for years, but the maze had changed the game. He wasn't invisible anymore. The next morning, Javier waited at the labyrinth's entrance, his hands steady but his mind alert. Cassandra had asked to meet, to see more, and he wasn't sure what to expect. Her admission yesterday, her grudging respect, felt like a step, but he knew her too well to trust it fully. She could still spin this, claim the maze as her own, or worse, bury it. He'd show her the labyrinth's heart, but he'd watch her closely. This wasn't just about plants anymore, it was about who they both were. Cassandra arrived on time, her usual polish softened by a simple sweater and flats, no heels clicking today. Javier, she said, nodding, her voice neutral but not cold. He nodded back, gesturing to the maze. Let's walk. They stepped inside, the jasmine scent greeting them, the paths unfolding like a story. She didn't speak at first, her eyes tracing the vines, the blooms, the careful twists. Javier let the silence sit, letting the labyrinth do the talking. At the first alcove, where moonflowers glowed even in daylight, he stopped. These, he said, touching a petal, take years to bloom right. I started them from seeds I traded for in a market. They're fragile, but they're survivors. Cassandra listened, her face unreadable but her eyes fixed on the flowers. Why these? She asked, not sharp, just curious. They're not showy like roses. Javier smiled faintly. They don't need to be. They're honest. They moved deeper, Javier pointing out details, the orchids he'd nursed through frost, the vines trained to arch just so. He didn't lecture, just shared, his voice steady, grounded in years of craft. Cassandra's questions came slowly, then faster. How do you know what works together? What's the rarest plant here? How long did this take? Her tone wasn't the usual interrogation, it was real, almost hungry. For the first time, Javier felt her see him, not as a tool, but as a man with a gift. At the maze's heart, by the fountain, they sat. The star-shaped blooms framed the space, their scent mingling with the water's murmur. This is the center, Javier said. Every path leads here. It's where the labyrinth lives. Cassandra leaned forward, her hands clasped. It's alive, she said, almost to herself. I didn't get it before. Not really. She paused, then met his eyes. I was wrong about you. The words hit harder than he expected. He'd waited years for them, but now they felt heavy, not triumphant. You didn't see me, he said, not accusing, just stating.
You saw what you wanted to.
She flinched, barely, but enough.
I did, she admitted, her voice low. I'm not good at this. She gestured vaguely, maybe at the maze, maybe at humility. But I want to be.
Javier studied her, weighing her words. She wasn't the Cassandra who'd mocked him, but she wasn't a friend either.
Not yet. What do you want now? He asked, direct.
She exhaled, looking at the fountain.
I want to do something real, she said. Not for show, not for my name. Something like this. She nodded at the maze. I want you to lead it. Javier blinked, caught off guard. Lead what?
A community garden, she said, her voice gaining strength.
Here, on the estate. For the town.
Your vision, your rules.
He didn't answer right away.
It was a big offer, a chance to build something lasting, to share his craft. But it came from her, and he knew her ambition.
Was this genuine, or a way to tie his work to her name?
Why me? He asked, testing. She smiled, small but real.
Because you're better at this than I'll ever be, she said. And I'm tired of pretending I'm not impressed. It wasn't flattery, it was truth, raw and unpolished.
They talked longer, sketching ideas. A garden for kids to learn, for families to grow food, for the town to gather.
Cassandra offered land, funds, resources, but promised to step back.
It's yours, she said.
I'll just pay for it. Javier nodded, not fully trusting but willing to try. We'll see, he said.
She laughed, a sound he hadn't heard before, light, unguarded.
Fair enough.
Over the next weeks, they worked together, not as boss and worker, but as partners, tentative but real.
Cassandra learned to listen, to ask instead of order.
Javier saw her struggle with it, saw her pride clash with her desire to change. She wasn't perfect, she snapped once, frustrated over a delayed shipment, but caught herself, apologized. I'm trying, she said, and he believed her. He shared more, teaching her about soil, about patience. She soaked it up, her sharp mind finding new ground. The community garden took shape, its beds blooming under Javier's hands. Townsfolk came, curious, then stayed, planting, laughing, learning. Cassandra showed up sometimes, not to oversee but to help, her hands in the dirt, her laughter mixing with the kids. Javier watched her change, not all at once, but steady, like a plant finding light. Their friendship grew quietly, built on respect, on shared work. She never mocked him again.
One evening, as they walked the labyrinth, now open to the town, Cassandra stopped at the fountain.
You changed me, she said, no drama, just fact. Javier shrugged, his old modesty back. You changed yourself, he said.
I just grew the plants.
She smiled, shaking her head.
You're impossible.
But her eyes were warm, grateful. The labyrinth stood, a quiet monument to Javier's triumph, but the garden was his legacy.
He wasn't invisible anymore, not to Cassandra, not to the town, not to himself. And Cassandra, once his critic, was now his ally, her humility hard-won, her pride reshaped.
They'd built something together, not perfect, but alive.
And that was enough.